Welcome back to We Rock DM Amplified, the podcast where we dive into the world of digital marketing with the movers and shakers shaping the industry. I'm your host, Daniel Bisett, alongside my co-host, Tricia Elizabeth Ulberg, and today we're excited to introduce a very special guest. Joining us is April White, the innovative force and CEO of Trust Relations, a strategic communications agency that's redefining the PR landscape. April's journey in public relations is as diverse as it is impressive, having worked with top-tier agencies and a host of marquee brands. Her approach blends strategic messaging with creative storytelling, setting her apart in an industry that's constantly evolving. From TEDx stages to the halls of Forbes and Newsweek, April's insights have influenced many, and today she's here to share her unique perspective with us. We'll explore the intricacies of trust relations, the importance of authentic communication in today's digital world, and the secrets behind her award-winning strategies. So get ready for an episode filled with invaluable insights. Whether you're a marketing veteran or just starting out, there's something in this conversation for everyone. Let's jump in and learn how to rock our digital marketing efforts with April White. April, welcome to We Rock DM Amplified.
Thank you. That was such a flattering intro. I think I need to have you rewrite my bio.
Well, NGL here, ChatGPT hooked me up. You know, I just took your bio from LinkedIn, populated it, and said, "Hey, Chat, write me a new intro for our latest podcast guest," and that's what Chat came up with. So,
I mean, I'm very flattered by ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I mean, it speaks the truth.
Right. So April, welcome. You and Tricia met recently in New York at American Business Awards Gala. Fantastic, congratulations! But before we dive into all of your accolades, I'd really like you to just kind of tell us the TLDR of April White. Who are you? Where'd you come from? How'd you get here?
So I actually grew up in Iowa, and I decided early on I wanted to be a writer. My parents, being very Midwestern, said, "That's great, but why don't you do a degree in something we know you can make money at?" And so they sort of shifted me from wanting to be a screenplay writer into being a journalist. I realized very early on in my journalism career that I was not the right personality fit for that profession. Because in order to be a very good journalist, you have to have really thick skin and not care about what anybody that you're interviewing thinks of you or what you write. And I did not have that quality. I'm too much of a people pleaser. So about 2 years into it, I'm like, I think I need to be in PR because then I'm advocating for one side of the story instead of trying to tell two. I can at least make one side of the story happy. And quite frankly, it paid a lot better. And I was already kind of reading the writing on the wall of where journalism was going in terms of compensation and sort of stability, right? So I thought, okay, well, this is a good moment for me to make the shift. So I did that, then decided I need to go to the city where PR is actually, at the top of its game because I want to be the best I can be at this. So I got a job in New York City from Iowa. That was a whole story in and of itself, but that would take a whole other 15 minutes. Ended up getting my first PR job in New York City, moving to New York, worked my way up the PR ladder in New York City. And eventually, over time, it was kind of funny because I had this thing in my head being Midwestern. I don't know if anybody can relate to this being from, somewhere in the middle of the country, but it was like, I'm going to go to New York where the smartest and the best of the best are going to be. And I'm going to just be like, this tiny fish in this giant sea, and everyone's going to, be running laps around me. But when I got there, what I discovered was there were a lot of things in the industry that I was befuddled by. I was like, this is the best we have to offer. I can't believe that. Right. And so over time, I accumulated more and more of these thoughts. And then it was like, okay, I think I need to go out and create the thing I wish existed rather than kind of complaining about what I wish would be different. And that's what I did. So fast forward multiple years, I ended up founding Trust Relations because I saw all these different pain points in the industry that I wanted to address, both as a culture internally and also in terms of client services. So there's a whole host of things that we're doing differently. And that's partly where the most innovative woman of the year from last year at the Stevies, and then Maverick of the Year awards came from this year, because I am kind of just turning the whole paradigm, like the whole PR paradigm on its head, and deciding like this is what it's supposed to look like. So I guess in essence, I've accidentally tried to reinvent the PR agency world, because I didn't like my experience there.
I think that's why a lot of us do that, right? That's the perfect reason to do that. And I remember us trying to talk about this at the Stevies. It was very so loud. April and I were sitting next to each other at the awards table, and we were trying to network and talk to each other. And I remember you telling me that you had won an award because you were trying to you created a PR firm that was different than other PR firms, right? So
yes.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that. So what makes you different? What are the pain points that you address in your firm?
So there are a number of things. So one of the things that really irked me was just kind of the culture in general was very toxic and backbiting. I always felt like crabs in a bucket where everyone's trying to climb on each other to drag the other one down to get to the top. So there's a lot of that, and just not a good feeling of, in general, there's a lot of sort of like pushing down on people below to do the work. So the more senior people got, then the more they would sort of just dump. Like it wasn't delegating, it was dumping, right? So there was this feeling of like, okay, the junior people just have to do everything. So then what happened is junior people are leading accounts they have no business leading. The senior people have gotten reallocated to just business development. So they come in for the pitches, they bring in the clients, and then they vanish because they have to keep bringing in new clients. But you don't actually then have those senior practitioners leading the work. There were also weird things around retainers. So, PR retainers are very expensive. And I think the average, entry-level PR retainer now is $12,000 a month. So it's not, but what I didn't understand was we'd have some clients, it's like, okay, so Sotheby's International Realty, and they're paying $12 a month. And then there's MetLife International, and they're paying $20 a month. I'm making these up. I don't remember now the retainer numbers, but it was like something like that. But then in practice, I, as a practitioner leading both accounts, didn't know why one was higher than the other, because the output was the same. And so it was like, it's like, oh, we just charge them what we think they'll pay. Is that what this is? Like, I don't understand what that is. So the work was not commensurate with the budget, is the easiest way to put that. So that also bothered me, because I didn't understand why some people were paying more than other people, and then why they're not getting more money, more for their money, right? That didn't make sense to me. So there was that. And then also just kind of an overarching issue with inclusivity that was not intentional, but was just baked into the culture. And so there was a lot of this sort of like a lot of agencies where everybody that worked there kind of looked like they showed up for central casting for the same role, right? Like they all kind of had this, they looked alike, they talk alike, sometimes they even acted like, it was like same outfit, all, and it was like you had to look at it was kind of like an agency uniform that was expected. And if you didn't fit in, then, and that in general just it's not conducive to inclusivity, right? Because what I have now is an agency with, some people like tattooed up and tongue rings, and some people are like super prim and proper moms, and some people who are, and all different skin tones, and all different sexualities, and all different, religions, and like all different political viewpoints, right? And that's what I want. I don't want it to be everybody has to kind of fit some mold, right? I think it's
you don't want to be cookie cutter.
No, and I want the diversity of thought that comes with that, because from a storytelling perspective, a prim and proper mom from the Midwest is going to have a very different perspective on a certain product that they're pitching to the press versus like, my fashion model out in New York City who does like fit modeling on the side, which is a real thing I have. So it's like that's, that's just a very different perspective, and that has nothing necessarily to do with the typical diversity as you see it, but it's that diversity of like perspective of thought, and I think that's really important.
Also, if you're reaching out to the public is not all the same single individual.
No.
Right? So
no, and
you
the
need
media
to be
is all
able
different. They have different angles. Like it's so diverse. So so one of the things I did at the outset was just made us virtual. so that we weren't making clients pay for a fancy office space in New York and LA and San Francisco or whatever it is. Because I think at the end of the day, the reason that they can't afford to have senior practitioners on the accounts is because they're paying too much for office space. So why do
overhead?
That? We don't need overhead, right? There's no reason. What these people are talking to individual reporters via text, Instagram, Twitter, phone, email, whatever they're doing in person, right? But like, it's not about sitting next to other people who are also doing that. It's not very helpful. And you can always have a Zoom call if you need to get on the same page about something or brainstorm, or you can just like send out a blast email to the whole agency. Hey, does anybody have a great contact at Forbes? Because I'm striking out on this pitch, like anybody that you guys can think of, right? So, I mean, there's no reason that you have to be. And in fact, if you were sitting in a room, when I've done that before at an agency, it's actually very distracting because then everybody's talking to each other. Hey, does anybody know, like, has anybody heard back from, like, Marjorie at, like, BuzzFeed or what? I was like, you're interrupting me. I was just thinking, now it takes 15 minutes to reset my brain to get back onto focusing, whatever it was. So I just cut that out. So I cut that out, and I decided also that then we could staff people from across the country. I also did a hybrid approach. So I have some full-time people, but some freelance people. And the reason for that is because I want experts who are qualified to work on that account, and not just, okay, we have somebody with capacity. They don't really have the right experience, but we're going to smash it together and hope that it tastes fine. And it's like, no, that's not how this should be done. You should find the qualified expert for each thing. And maybe I don't have 40 hours of work for somebody that's super senior at crypto, or right. But I don't, so I don't need to hire that person full time because that's
and that person probably doesn't want a 40-hour gig. They probably want like 15 or 12, right? So
I mean, most of those people are happiest being freelancers.
Yeah.
Because they also bounced out of the industry out of the agency world for similar reasons, and they're like, no, I'm on my own. This is I'm afraid to ever be in another committed agency relationship, right? like a lot of these people. So, so instead of letting, it's kind of a win-win because then they have an agency that's teeing up work for them and coming to them with a professional structure. And we've got, fully built out teams and it's like, we treat them like their families. So they still get gifts on their birthdays and invited to our holiday parties and invited to our all agency retreats. So nobody that's freelance is ever treated as anything less than a part of the family, and I know it's sort of taboo now, the family thing at work, but they are, they are added in as part of they are not treated differently.
Part of the band.
Other than the fact that,
you probably say that.
Maybe they didn't get that's a better way of saying like, maybe they don't, if they take days off, they don't get paid for it because they're freelancing, but like, that's literally the only difference.
That's why we're freelancing.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to work today, so I'm not going to work today.
100%. You can do that, and they love it. And some of them want to be, freelance because they would even. I've approached some of them to be full time, and some of them are like, I prefer doing my own thing because then I'm not on your schedule or anybody else's schedule. I have kids, or I have to take care of my elderly parents, or I have
a surf trip up, coming up.
I have some people who have like other businesses they're trying to get off the ground, like, tea companies and whatever they're doing, and that's fine. Yeah. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is part of your value prop, your key differentiators is you went virtual. So, you could reduce the overhead and therefore not necessarily reduce what the clients are paying, but what they're receiving for that money.
Yeah, the value is a lot higher.
The value.
Although our monthly retainers are lower than the average.
Okay.
And we're doing part, to help people that are not ready for 12 a month, to get off the ground and grow with them.
And so you also threw pickles in the cookie jar by diversifying, right? You're like, it's a jar. I could put anything in this jar. It doesn't have to be friggin' cookies all the time. It can be a pickle, whatever.
Yes.
Maybe some mayonnaise later. It's all good.
That sounds so gross, but yeah.
I mean,
the point is
that it works, but it works, right? And you're not stuck on a 9 to 5 regime with expectations. I mean, you have expectations clearly of everyone that comes to work for you. You probably have, from what I can tell, very high expectations, but because you're providing the freedom and flexibility, you're probably delighted with, the results rather than being a little disgruntled, which is
100%.
A much more likely outcome in the agency, the
Yeah.
statistical agency kind of status quo.
Yeah. And there's a lot lower turnover because of the way that, we're the culture and the way we staff things.
I don't mean for this to get political. Is it political? Whatever.
No,
I'm going there.
I'm ready to tap dance. Let's do it.
Y'all met at a gala celebrating women in business.
Yes, we did.
Right?
Yes.
Did that bad taste in your mouth when you were up in New York City come from white men?
Ooh, that's a loaded question, Daniel.
It's a loaded question, and I can tell you no. I can tell you no. In fact, the worst experience I had in the agency was that a group that was run by 2 women.
Right.
And they
too.
And the toxicity of that group far surpassed any other thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it was like if you took Mean Girls and The Devil Wears Prada and you put together a movie about PR, that whatever you're picturing is what happened.
I had a very similar experience.
I got called the C word.
Oh goodness.
By a woman.
Wow. Yeah. Women can be really, you would think that women would be supporting each other, and very often we are. But for sure, the times I have not felt supported have been by other women. I agree. And I even told Daniel, I love having a male business partner. And Daniel's really great about, supporting women. But no, I know what you mean. I know what you mean by that. We need to be better about that.
Maybe start at the hand of privileged white men who created a culture that then everyone existed inside of, and females trying to, survive,
assimilate,
assimilate and even surpass, and because maybe that's very possible. I'm not trying to say that they're all privileged white men are great. That's not I'm not trying to say that, but I'm also trying to just be honest that I don't maybe the gender created sort of the landscape, but within that landscape there were monsters of all genders.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
I do feel, though, we as women, we have, and it's so funny, I was just talking to my sister about this last night. We were talking about the Women in Business Awards. And you know what she asked me? She's like, is there a Men in Business Award?
That's funny.
No, there's not. We are a minority. We're not minority. What are we?
We're considered a minority,
in business.
Yeah, I still, it's very funny. I recently did a Women in Business panel, and every other woman there had some sort of, very intense, dramatic story about how difficult it was for them to be a woman in business.
Yeah. And
the interesting thing is, I grew up kind of as a tomboy and never identified as being anything lesser than the boys. I mean, I'm still tall, but I was really tall young, and I used to play basketball at recess and stuff all the boys and play tetherball and swing it over their head. I just never accepted that I was this weak girl that wasn't able to do anything the boys did. So there was never a moment in my sort of history where that got
played
shook.
a role.
Yeah. And so I still don't think when people say, oh, it's so cool that you're a business owner as a woman. And I'm like, that's a weird thing to say. What do you mean?
Why do you need to qualify it with the prepositional phrase at the end? It's
I don't
really
identify as having fewer opportunities. I've just always bulldozed my way to the top.
You've always
I don't
just
know.
kicked ass. You've just been like, screw this.
But
I'm gonna do it my way.
It's a masculine trait, though, right? So that's fair.
We're talking about years and years of history where we didn't really have the opportunities we do now, right? And so there is some relearning to be done there. And I do feel like we have to defend ourselves more often. Something my sister and I were talking about is how if men don't ever have to defend, their choice to be working, their career, and how that maybe takes away from the family a little bit, because people think, oh, well, men are working to support their families. But if women do that, we will get very often accused by other women of not prioritizing family because we have a career. This happens to women, but not to men. Yeah. Right? So I feel like that there's a lot of that, just years and years of that, that we have to, that's part of why we have to defend ourselves a little bit more than men do.
Yeah.
So speaking of retraining, I totally derailed our conversation. So I want to bring us back on track if at all possible. But
I know,
thank you for exploring that with me.
I felt like we were just going down the the track.
Let's just do this. Let's do this rabbit hole. Well, I really want to talk about PR and branding.
Yes.
Because, we've taught, Tricia and I have been teachers of digital marketing boot camps for University of Texas McComb School of Business for 3+ years now. And there's a key component about branding, and brand identity and brand voice and all the things. But we don't touch on PR at all.
Oh, interesting.
Now, I think that there's overlap. I think that there's overlap, but I really want to tease out and unpack what PR is and how important it is in and of itself. Because, we go out and we sell digital marketing. We do digital marketing. It's all digital marketing. And then somebody wants to print something in a newspaper and we're all panic. We're like, wait, you want hard media? Why do you want to do that? So I really want to explore how they complement each other, and what it is that we as digital marketers really should be pitching out to PR agencies like yourselves, instead of trying to tackle it ourselves. Right?
Okay.
So can we go that direction for a little bit?
Let's do it. So in the spirit of you guys being professorial, I'm going to lay the landwork like PR 101 and where it fits inside the marketing mix. So I'm sure everybody listening knows that there are 3 buckets within marketing, right? There's paid, there's owned, and there's earned. Mm-hmm. The paid media is obviously your advertising, and digital marketing, etc. Your own channels are the things you own. So your website, your social media channels, your blog, things like that, where you get to say whatever you want about yourself. So in those 2 buckets, you get to say whatever you want about yourself. And obviously in advertising, if you say things, you can get, in trouble with regulatory bodies, etc.
False advertising.
You can't false advertising. You cannot do. You can say whatever you want, but you can say more or less whatever you want within legal and regulatory confines, right?
Right.
Same thing with your own channels. But everybody knows that you own those channels or you paid for it. So it's like, okay, it's kind of like when people are on Instagram, they're like, look how hot I am. I'm so hot. I'm so fabulous. And you're like, you're saying that, right? It's like, you kind of are, right? It's like different.
Are you though?
On the earned channels, that's where you've earned the media through your actual credibility, what you're actually doing, what you actually have to say that sets you apart as a thought leader, as a brand, as whatever, right? And this is the only part of marketing where you can build your credibility. Everything else, you're patting yourself on the back. But PR, it's like, oh, he was on the top 10, GQ's top 10 most eligible bachelor list. He must be hot AF, right? And you're like, okay, cool. Like, that's different than the guy being like, look at my pecs. And you're like, ugh, right? So it's like, that's a very crass example, but this happens all the time. And so if you get, the cool thing is when you get PR, it should feed back into the owned and the paid channels. So you should then repurpose the placements you got. And if you're targeting, I don't know, let's say you get an article in Essence magazine, and you're struggling to reach people that are 18 to 24 BIPOC, right? And you're like, cool, I'm going to repurpose this, retarget this in advertising format on digital channels. And make sure that everybody in that category that we're trying to reach sees the article in Essence, and voila, right? So it's like it infiltrates your owned and your paid media with a level of credibility you don't get otherwise. So then on your social media, it's like, hey, I'm so flattered and so honored that I won this award, or that I was included in this article, or I was like invited to speak on this podcast, right? And then it doesn't look so much like, look at me, look at me, look at me. It's like, oh, wow, somebody else said that. And then you get to look humble.
Right.
Right.
You get to feign. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I mean, where I really see PR playing a role in the modern marketing landscape, because it used to be more about how do we persuade public opinion and, relating to the public and all of that. And it's slightly shifted, which is actually why I coined the term trust relations and named my agency that. Because I think it's now a trust relations and in IT is where a server or two servers have decided to share information. They trust each other. And this is what this is now, right? This is not like the brand preaching from on high in the mountain down to the lowly people. That's the audience. No, the audience has just as loud of a voice now, thanks to social media. So now it is a two-way communication, and it should continue to be that. And I think that that's really where it's gone, instead of this idea of like, what does the public think of us? And let's spin the truth so they think whatever they want. That doesn't work anymore. So what brands have to do now is actually do something credible, say something interesting, create something actually innovative and new, and then they're rewarded for doing the actual work through earned media that recognizes it, and then they can amplify those things. But it doesn't work anymore to just kind of do the smoke and mirrors like David Copperfield, David Blaine thing, and make people think something about you that's not true. There's just, you have to have the proof points. You have to substantiate the claims. You have to actually, have the rubber meet the road in whatever direction you're trying to point your messaging. And so that's where we are now with PR. But within the PR mix, just to kind of paint the picture. So it's not just the earned media, meaning getting in news articles, getting interviews on podcasts, getting interviews on TV. It's also award submissions. It's also thought leadership related things. So, talking head related things, writing contributed articles that get published in publications. And it's also about speaking engagements. So all of those things, again, kind of feed back to that credibility building piece. So in my mind, and have the lines been blurred a bit between the paid and the earned? 100%. There's weird things happening now with affiliate marketing, consumer PR. I don't know how much you want me to dive into that craziness, but that's happening. And there are also all these, Forbes councils, Newsweek councils, entrepreneur councils, all of which I'm on, all of which you can write as many articles as you want, but you have to pay to be on the council. And so is that a paid opportunity? Not really, because you have to have the credibility to get invited.
You have to be legitimized in some way.
You have to be legitimate to actually get the thing, but do you have to pay for the thing? Yeah. So it's like,
I mean, it's kind of like the Stevie Awards, not the ones that y'all just received, but the standard ABAs.
You typically have to, not different categories are free, but no, you have to pay for all the award submissions.
It doesn't devalue.
And now the speaking opportunities, if you're not a sponsor at the same conference,
Yeah.
probably aren't going to get the speaking up.
You got 30 seconds. We're going to start the music 10
or
seconds
zero.
in.
They're like, you know
or
what?
zero.
Well, usually they come back now and say, hey, we have a package for that.
Yeah.
And if you get a $25,000 booth and,
perfect.
That include, for $25K, you get a booth, plus you get an ad in the program, plus you get a speaking opportunity on the stage. And it's it's gotten blurry. It's gotten blurry. But not everything is that.
I noticed at the last conference I went to the AIGA Design Conference in New York, that every speaker was selling a book. Every single book. Every single speaker. I have a new book. It's in the lobby.
You have to have a book now. I mean, I started writing a book and then I sort of put it on pause for the moment. I need to circle back to it and finish it. But it's like you kind of have to write a book. And are you going to get paid for that book? No. Like, that is not... People will come to me and they're like, I'm going to make all this money on this book. I was like, no, you're not. No, you are not. I mean, if you're Brene Brown, yes, you will. If you're not Brene Brown, probably not. Probably not.
we just, I don't know if Tricia told you, but recently we just got headhunted to write a book.
Did you?
And so we're not trying the self-published route, thank goodness. Because I want to write a book, but I don't want to write a book and not get paid for it. So hopefully we're busting through that mold.
Collateral.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's evidence that you're a thought leader.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And it's like almost a requirement.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Like, oh, good. You have a LinkedIn account. Oh, good. You wrote a book. Cool. I don't need to look at it either. I just need to know you did it.
I ain't going to read that thing. But
absolutely.
No.
that
like,
for
wow,
sure.
she won an award and wrote a book. That's let's talk to her.
Exactly. It's cred. Yeah. And that's, Daniel, that's what we've talked about this. Like, it's awesome that we got, we are hoping we make some money, but it really is about credibility, right? We're writing a WordPress book. So yeah, I agree.
100%.
So interesting. So, all right. So that was such a great description. How do you feel that blends with digital marketing? What a PR agency does and a marketing agency, digital marketing.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things, a lot of times when we start working with a client, if we don't do a messaging and branding exercise at the outset, but rather rely on whatever they have already put on their website or their social media channels, it almost always is a disaster. And there are two reasons for that. So one of the reasons it's a disaster is that often their website copy is not up to date and they don't even realize it. And so we've had incidents in the past where I have a new system in place to bypass this by always doing the messaging branding exercise at the outset. But we had incidents in the past where it was like, hey, we wrote this press release for you. And they're like, where the hell did you get this information? And it's totally wrong. And it's like, your website.
Came from your website.
Your website. It's on your website. Like, we pulled it from your website.
It's on the about page.
Right, 100%. And then they're like, oh my God, this is all wrong. And then how do you say, then your website's wrong? Like, it's like so awkward, right? So we don't do that. The other reason, though, that's a problem is that the language in marketing and on your website tends to be more flowery and emotionally driven and sort of beautiful, right? So you're putting a lot of colors out there and it feels and, like all of the feels. But the evidence of your claims is very rarely included in your marketing copy. I actually think that that's not great. I think it would be better if people in general looked for these things. But what happens is we take that flowery language and we feed it to the skeptical press that asks all of the hardest questions and none of your customers ever will. We're going to look so stupid. So stupid. Because they're going to ask, okay, great. So you're committed to sustainability. What does that mean? What are you doing? Who do you donate money to? Because we donate 10% of everything to charity. Okay, what charity? Right? And these are those are kind of silly examples, but you would be surprised the number of companies that have these grand claims. And then when you push them on, okay, cool. So what does that look like that you're dedicated to XYZ? Where's the evidence of that? So we can kind of, show and not tell, like in good storytelling, right? You're supposed to, with good writing, show, don't tell. It's the same with brand narratives, right? You have to show and not tell. And so what we do at the outset now is pull apart, okay, great. So how can we show people that you're dedicated to customer service? What do you do that's different? How can we show them that you have best in class technology? What does that look like? What makes you different? Right? We need to know all of these things. And so what I would say is that we're doing that for PR purposes so that we don't get skewered when it comes to pitching the reporters who already know what ask all these hard questions are going to ask them. But also, if our clients can then use that to do a better job of narrative storytelling, right? Of, hey, let's show, don't tell. Then their marketing will be stronger.
In theory, that improved content should improve the user experience on the website, because, just because journalists are asking hard questions doesn't mean that readers or visitors or potential client leads aren't interested in that information. That's why the journalists are asking those hard questions, because it does matter. So if
you don't know the number of people that came to your site and bounced out because all they saw was fluff.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, tell me something that of substantial. This doesn't say anything.
Right.
It's like, all I hear is blah, blah, blah. When you talk, all I hear is blah, blah, blah. It's like, what is this?
This is so
I'm pretty
interesting.
sure that's all my wife hears when I talk about work, though. I mean, let's be honest here. She's like, yeah, tell me about work so I can go to sleep. I'm like, dang it, really?
Bedtime story. All right. Talk about your day.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do on our podcast, April, is we will have guests come on. They're usually small business owners, and we will look at their websites and give them suggestions on how to improve them. And it's funny. I would say that 90% of the time our conversations end up being about content management. We expected it to be more about technical, and sometimes it is navigation or layout, or and sometimes, but usually we get stuck on the content management. The content
does not surprise me.
Right.
It's very hard for people to know how to talk about themselves.
Yes.
And people get insecure about it. And a lot of times, I think what I find is that it actually highlights their insecurities about whether what they're doing is actually different enough. Because they dig into it and you're like, okay, great. So what are you doing that's actually different from other agencies, right? And in my case, I get to say, hey, we have a point system in place that gamifies retainers so that you know exactly what you're getting for your money, and it's commensurate with your budget you're getting. And, I can actually say that, right? Because we're doing something different rather than, we're just making sure that retainers are appropriate for what the size of the company is. And what does that mean? Right? What is that? That doesn't say anything.
So your website content needs to closely match everything you're doing from a PR perspective, really brand in general. I remember we had a guest once who was doing a lot of public speaking events, and at the end of her event, she had like a poster up with a QR code. Visit my website. So she explained to us what she would talk about in her her presentations, but what her website said was something different. So when people go to your website, are they seeing what you just spoke to? Not necessarily, right? And I think that it's really important that people think about the whole picture like that. That's brand building, all the different pieces, from what you're doing from a PR perspective to the marketing pieces, which is your website, to what you're doing on social media. Those all need to flow together and work together. That's to make you look legit, right?
Yeah.
Just like you said, to give you credibility. Well,
and it all needs to have the same look, feel, tone, story, right? Because so many people are inundated by everything now. And if they don't have the same experience with you at every touch point, they're going to get confused and it's going to turn to fuzz. And then anything you did, let's say that you're working on your website so that it matches the rest of everything It's like, well, then they're going to go to your website and it's not going to match. And whatever they previously learned, they'll either unlearn or it's all just going to fall flat like, House of Cards, right? Down it goes. So you really have to make sure it's all lockstep.
Yeah.
Consistency.
It's amazing to me how many people don't know what's on their website. Just like you were talking about, they don't. Yes. They even like misspelled words, content that shouldn't be there. People they forget about it. But my goodness, how many times do you when you go to Google somebody? What do? You go to their website. That's one of the first touches, right? Or very often the second touch is the second touch. Yeah. So yes, that's very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. Very cool. So more, I love this branding conversation. So let me ask this then, when you bring in a new client, a new PR client, where do you usually start with that client? Like, how do you get the ball rolling in terms of branding?
So I do what I call trust analysis with them. And I sit down for a couple of hours with all the key, decision makers on the client side. Anybody, because sometimes the other thing that can happen is, there's disagreement among them. And if you don't get that out of the way at the meeting at the front, then basically what happens is you become like the child caught between the fighting parents in copy.
Yeah.
And you're like trying to appease both sides because they're not on the same page about what they want to say. And so what I try to do at the outset now is just have this meeting. Okay. And go to the basics. I ask them really basic questions about their competitors, what their mission, their reason for being, what actually makes them different, what proof points do they have of it, things like that, I tell them, there's a caveat, like I know this is going to seem really basic, but I just don't want to make any assumptions. And I know things can change rapidly. And so what you have already expressed might not match either where you are now or where you want to go. And what we're also going to do as part of this conversation is figure out where do you want the brand to evolve so that our messaging can point and shoot you in that direction rather than just stating where you are now, right? We need to sort of do the grandiose thing carefully. Obviously, you'd want to have the proof points and the examples and the things you're doing or trying to do. But, at the same time, you want to make sure that, this is really how we're trying to talk about ourselves and what we want people to know. And that way, when we write a press release, when we pitch a story, we don't get the feedback, well, this isn't anything we want to talk about, right? Because that can happen too. Like you just start pitching stories willy-nilly and you don't know what they actually want out there in the marketplace. And then they're like thankless because, okay, you got me this placement, but this isn't anything we want to talk about and it doesn't help us with generating sales or leads or whatever. It's like, oh, so we need to get that figured out. So what are we trying to say? What are the key messages? Great. Then from there, every single story we're trying to tell, every byline article, every speaking off, every award submission should stem from the same consistent messages. Obviously, it's going to be told in different ways and color in different colors and, give people different slices and perspectives of the same story, but it all has to come back and map to that roadmap that we create at the outset.
We have a very similar way of talking about branding from the digital marketing and designs perspective as well. There's just a big difference when you have put the time into figuring out who the customer is. And what is it your brand, what are you trying to say? Who is the customer you're trying to reach? And doing that research before we start the design process, because then you have something to measure with too, right? You know what your goal is, and then you can look at what you're creating and ask yourself, is what I've created going to answer that question I had of who is my customer? And sometimes I think the biggest shock to new clients who haven't done that work is that they have to do that work now. They haven't really thought that through. And it can be a little bit painful sometimes, right? If you haven't done that work before, it's surprising. So,
what I find most painful is having so many decision makers in the same room.
Yeah.
And all thinking that they're top dog. It's like, okay, I need one decision maker, because we got to make a decision. Are we going to really vote every single time? What's the deal here?
Yeah.
Y'all are telling me 5 different stories. Which one do I believe? How in the hell do we then translate that out to the world when we've got 5 different stories in one business? So how do you navigate that?
We're speaking from some experience here. I mean, we all do this, right?
I'm getting over a cold, and somehow that just like that question just brought it all back to the surface. Like, oh, I'm sick all over again just thinking about that. So it's very difficult. You can't necessarily come out and say that, but what you can say is, why don't you collectively get us your feedback? So one thing we do to bypass that issue is that we have a set number of edits that can be made on any written material. And then if you go over those edits, it's not a problem, but we do charge an extra point. So like I was alluding to earlier, we have this point system for retainers. So every activity we do has certain point allocations assigned to it. You get those points to spend every month. We can roll them over, we can borrow them, whatever. Like, it's flexible-ish. But that way we make sure we aren't over-servicing, and also that they're actually getting their money's worth, rather than, well, this client's happy enough, we got them enough placements, let's shift all our focus to this other client that's struggling. Because that's gross. I don't like that. We did that a lot at bigger agencies that I worked at previously. So that helps a little bit, because you can say, I see that you got your edits in to our Google Doc. Are the rest of the team's edits in the Google Doc? Because we want to just make sure that we make them all at once, so that when we use your edit, that we're maximizing the use of the edits in our time to make sure we're like doing it all at once, right? So that's one way. When it comes to the actual meeting, it's more of being diplomatic in how you navigate the voices in the room, and also partly deciding who everyone else seems to have subconsciously agreed is the final vote. Because it's not always the person you think. But if you can identify the prima donna in the room and go, okay, this is the person that we're appeasing as a group. Like, this is the diva, right? This is like the Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada. Like, this is the person, right? Like, this is the person everyone's scared of. And then you just realize, okay, cool. This is the default voice. Even if they're not the CEO. It could be the wife of the CEO. It could be the daughter of it. Like, you don't know until you get in the room. But then it's just a matter of using like emotional intelligence and, micro expressions and things like that, and like analyzing. Okay. So Anna Wintour's over here.
That's where I feel very, very fortunate to have Tricia, because I just lose my patience and I just want to like, okay, I'm done. Mal. Or I want to get really mean.
It's a little bit like being a therapist. It's like a little bit like being a therapist for people, like for a group, without letting them know that's what you're doing.
Well, and this especially applies to branding, because branding is so personal. And it's very personal.
So personal.
As a designer, I always say designing somebody's logo is the hardest thing a designer does, because there are so many feelings. It's a mark that represents you or your company or all your hard work, or it's very personal. So it can be very challenging to get feedback or try to point a client in a certain direction without making them feel personally attacked, right? There's an art to that. It's hard. Very difficult.
Well, and there are cases where, and I've had clients where we kind of ended up needing to part ways because they had conflicting. I had one, and I don't want to name names or give details, but there was one that went through some M&A adjacent activity, and as a result ended up with sort of two people that were not often or ever on the same page.
Yeah.
whose opinions were supposed to be taken at equal weight. And it felt like being gaslit for the entirety of the contract. Because you'd hear one thing and you'd do it, and it was like, this is all wrong. And you'd be like, okay, so this person wants this, but then it would like the other person would hate it. This is all wrong. Or the one person would like it temporarily, but the other person would sort of like poop on it, and then the person A would decide that they no longer liked it, even though the feedback was initially. It was like, I need to exit this hell. Like, this is crazy.
Again,
this is crazy.
It's just the emotional attachment that people have to branding. Branding 100%. Is just very difficult. It's very difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, April, as we're nearing the end of today's incredibly insightful conversation that's taken many different lanes and tracks, I'd love to ask you one final question that I think our listeners, viewers would benefit from. And it's that if you could leave them with just one piece of advice, a key takeaway or a golden nugget of wisdom from your incredibly vast experience in public relations and strategic communications, what would that be? What's the one thing you wish someone had told you earlier in your career, or a guiding principle that you think every digital marketer or PR professional should remember?
I would say you have to do what you say before you can say what you do. And so this is the thing that I was getting at before with the trust relations and you have all these value propositions and you have all these, you need to have the substantiating proof points. You can't just go out and say that you're the next best thing in XYZ, or that you have the most XYZ thing. You have to do it first. So once you do it, then you can say it. But there is no way that you can just anymore. It used to be the case people were gullible, they would believe it. This is not today. Like, this is almost 2024. That is not where we are.
That's so applicable across the board. I mean, that's your show don't tell and storytelling, right? But that's also parenting 101. You can tell me you're gonna pick up your socks, but until you start picking up your socks, I'm not going to know that you're going to pick up your socks. So let's pick up the socks first, and then we can have a talk about you're going to do it from now on, right? That's brilliant advice, and brilliant in its simplicity, right? I really think that that's fantastic. Tricia, you have anything else you want to add before we wrap?
Daniel, do you see why April and I got along? Really, 100%. I mean, we think alike, and I'm so glad that I met you. I'm glad that we ended up sitting next to each other during that. It was funny. We were both like really nervous that we'd have to what are we going to speak in our interviews, and it was really fun that we ended up meeting at that event. And thank you so much for being our podcast guest.
I feel very, very fortunate that the two of y'all met. April, just speaking to you for this last 55 minutes and change, you are an expert, and it is clear to me that whoever hires your agency has made an excellent decision. So kudos to you and all of your accolades.
You're so sweet. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, it's wonderful having you on the show.
It's been such a pleasure. Yeah.